Welcome to the Empowered Money Girl, where we break down the barriers to financial confidence, celebrate women's wins, and reveal the secrets to living boldly and well. I'm your host, Josette Mandela. So I have a question for you. What if the thing that once felt like your biggest struggle became the spark for your life's purpose? LeMond is here to show us how it's done. She's the founder and CEO of Mosaic Weighted Blankets, a company she built after discovering firsthand how deep pressure therapy could calm her own sensory processing disorder. What began as a personal solution grew into one of the nation's leading weighted blanket brands, bringing better sleep, less anxiety, and more well-being to thousands of adults and children across the country. With a background that spans professional recruiting, entrepreneurship, and product innovation, she's now channeling that same passion for inclusion and design into her newest venture, Enable Accessible Hair Care, creating beauty products that empower individuals facing daily barriers to self-care. If you're ready to see how purpose, innovation, and heart can build both impact and independence, you will love this conversation. Please welcome the visionary, compassionate, and relentlessly creative LeMond.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. So, Laura, can you take us back to the beginning? What was your path like to where you are today?
Well, I have a couple of factors. I'll make it quick. As far as my sensory issues go, I have a medical reason for that. I'm a twin, and we were born 6 weeks premature, and my mom was Rh negative, and this is in the early 60s. So I had multiple blood transfusions at birth, and so did my twin. So I guess when I got into school, I was a good reader. Um, I had terrible handwriting. I couldn't pay attention very well, and my desk was a mess. But I was a good student, right? So I think nowadays they would say, "Oh, ADHD or ADD kid, get them a 504 plan or work with them." In the 70s they didn't have anything like that, right? So that was one sign that I was a little different, couldn't do the big popular girl thing. My twin sister was real good at that, and I was not, and I'm still mystified as to how she does that. So I probably fit into that, on a spectrum somewhere. But I always liked having pressure on me and weight on me. And so I would pile pillows on myself. And when I was at UT Austin, and I had gotten into a dorm room for the summer. And I largely educated myself and put myself through school. So this was a great, fun, live in the dorm for a summer. Well, there were people running up and down the halls. There were people up all hours. It just violated every sense of sensibility I had. I just couldn't calm down. So I was taking a Shakespeare class, and I took my big, heavy Riverside Shakespeare that probably weighed about 10 pounds, and I put it on my feet, and it made me go to sleep. And I thought, you know what? There really is something to this. So fast forward, a few years, and I'm married and having kids, and it's all worse, right? Like I'm putting books on the bed, I'm putting soup cans on the bed. So one day I just woke up and I was like, I'm going to find somebody to help me. So I found these church ladies who sewed, and I got sandbags. I got sand and cheesecloth and had sandbags made, and these church ladies made open, like an open quilt, and I put these pockets into the blanket.
Oh,
So I fell asleep, and the next day I woke up and I was covered in sand, and I had never slept that well in my life. And I thought there really is something to this. So I went into business very early with a partner that I bought out. She knew a little bit more about sewing than I did. We found the material with the poly pellets. And there are arguments about glass beads versus plastic beads that, we could talk about later. And that's kind of a big debate in the weighted world. But that I went with these polystyrene pellets that weigh the blanket, they make it feel even. And then I started in business, and I had worked for a Fortune 500 company as a recruiter, and I'd worked since I was young. I was the child of a widow, and there were four kids. So no big deal. Lived in a nice house, right? Didn't have the new car when I was 16, didn't have the perfect pink bedroom, but I did learn how to work early and I like to work. And I will tell you that to be a successful entrepreneur, the ones that like to work do better than the ones that don't want to work because it's a lot of hard work. And a lot of times, if you think you might have ADHD and that's like a bad thing when you're young, my son has this ADHD thing that we do have too. Sometimes you have a teenager or a kid, they like have too much energy or they're out of control or they talk too much or whatever. But once they get to be a young adult and go forward in their lives, that translates into real drive, right?
Hmm.
It translates into self-discipline. It translates into enjoying what you're doing. And I think a lot of people with ADHD will find it as they get older that it's a blessing, right?
Yeah.
Like I kind of eat knowledge. Like I'll read a bunch of books by one author. Like right now I'm on a Jane Austen kick, right? Or I'll find a genre of music and search that out, but I'm sort of highly focused. And I would say that that has been a very rewarding thing in my life. I'm entertained in my own mind. And I mean, of course, I'm in a long-term relationship. I've had kids, I've had all the life experiences happen to me. But I wouldn't say I necessarily have to have anybody take care of me. So if you feel that way from the get-go, there's nothing wrong with you. I mean, like,
Yep.
and I'm so glad to see some of the elections we've had in Congress. I'm happy to see women that are running their own business. And if you walk into a boardroom and there's women there, it's no longer a surprise.
Right.
I'm, a little bit over 60. And when I first was young, our dad died young. So nobody ever told me, oh, you have to marry well. Oh, you have to be pretty. Oh, you have to find a husband. Oh, you have to learn how to type. When I was in high school, my mom said, I said, what do we have to take? And she said, well, you have to take typing and you have to take Latin, right? Because Latin will help you do better on the SAT. So I just learned, and I had a very successful sibling. Well, actually, all of us have been successful, but I had somebody to emulate that, worked in, corporate affairs early and did well. So I mean, I guess I'm running out of breath here, but I just feel that, those are the qualities that made me successful in my early journey. I mean, and I didn't launch the Weight of Blankets. I was like 50, right? So a lot
Hmm.
of women would say, oh, I'm so old. I can't do anything. I have a wrinkle. Well, I wasn't like that. I was like, oh, well, here we go. So anyway, so that's kind of me. But
Yeah, and I mean, that's a great story, is that you took what some people might have said was well, let's call it a disability,
sure.
and realized that no, no, this is part of me, and I'm going to make this a strength, and and ultimately led to your creating this business and being successful with it, and I think it's helpful for women out there that are struggling, that, like you say, maybe got that label of ADHD, and they're thinking, oh, well, my life is over, or I'll never be good at fill in blank here. And instead, if you use the skills that you've been given, you can make a whole different world for yourself.
Oh, absolutely. And also, do what you're good at. If you're naturally inclined towards something, don't let somebody say, like I know somebody that repairs pianos and repairs baby grands and makes bucks. Like we're talking quite a bit of money for like one, like one piano, right? And this
Mhm.
person was a good auto mechanic, and they had perfect pitch, and they played the drums. And all of a sudden, they started going to the Steinway where they had the Steinways and going, oh, yeah, this is at a tune and that's at a tune. And gosh, I wonder how this works. So if you have a knack, if you have a niche, if you have something that you just can't stop thinking about, which is kind of how I thought about the shampoo bottles. Once I thought about that, just try to accommodate it in your life, right? And don't let anybody tell you, you don't have time, right? Like we can all get up early, we can all work late, I mean, work when you're the most creative or when you're feeling the best. Some people wake up at 10:30. I wake up extremely early. The older I've gotten, the more I've woken up early. But I've always been a morning person. I never stayed up late in college to write papers. I was in bed by 9 o'clock, didn't care if it was popular, went out Friday night with my friends or whatever, or Saturday. But I was never that girl that was closing down the bar because I didn't like it. It wasn't my lifestyle. But just, go with the flow, think about what you're good at. And if you can't, forget about an idea and don't ever think like I had a guy in college and we had a class and he said in this class, it was like personal and family finance. He stood up and he said, it's my personal belief that everything that's ever been invented has been invented. Like nobody needs to invent anything. That's why I'm going into finance and accounting. And we were all like, woohoo, and this is like 1985. I mean, this guy, like, so don't let anybody tell you that you can't do something, right?
Absolutely. And it, here in 2025, if there's something that you want to do, there are very few barriers today to doing something new. Like you say, in the 80s when you and I were kind of figuring out what it is we're going to be when we grow up, it was a very different world. And there were a lot of women can'ts. Today, that's just silliness and maybe something that your family said to you, but it's not true. And you need to get past those things and
I
really,
applaud that. I applaud that statement and collaborate it.
yeah. So when it comes to your finances and financial independence, how do you feel about where you're at today?
I feel good about it. I was one of those people that once my business started making money, I never met a piece of property that I didn't like. And so some people collect, glassy babies, or some people collect fingernail polish. I just was very dedicated to, collecting properties at a certain point because that, I can manage them. People always need a place to live. I found it to be a good thing. And then, I was born into what is it, the horseman, the horseman stocks, right? Where I bought early into stock. And so, you can buy the S&P 500 average stock and, there do some research, that type of thing. But I'm not somebody that totally worries about spending money or not spending money. I mean, I'm not extravagant. I don't have a boat. I don't have a swimming pool, but I do allow myself little luxuries. And so, but I educated, kids through college and, did a lot of stuff. I became a single mom when they were about 7 and 9, and I was able to stay in our house. I mean, I did a lot of things. But I was lucky, I hit the market at a good time and I had a product that a lot of people wanted. And a lot of people copied me, but I feel like it's a good idea as a young person to get a financial advisor, if they want you to only buy their products and they don't want you to buy stock. I mean, you might vet that person, right? So I had a
Mhm.
stock advisor when I was like, I don't know, in about 1996, Google went public and she said, I don't want you to buy that stock. I want you to buy this fund because I get paid more on this EFT fund or something. And I said, I don't think I'm going to come back and see you anymore, right? So,
Mhm.
but I mean, there's so much information now with AI and with, there's just a lot of information available to, especially to young women, But I think the main thing is get a good financial plan, stick to it, try to save on a regular basis. And I'll tell you what, being in my early 60s, I'm glad everything that I did in the past now because I can relax. So you do have to have a certain amount of self-discipline, right? And I will say with the startup, if it's going to cost $1 million to launch a brand and you don't have $1 million, find an investor or find another way, right? Like don't fall so in love with your idea that,
Mm.
you plow through the previous income to make that happen. So, and I have seen people do that. So,
Yeah, and that is such an important thing, is that the earlier you start looking at your financial plan and figuring out what it is that I really want to do, what kind of money do I want to accumulate, and more importantly, learning some skills so that you can do that. In your case, you decided that I like real estate. People have to live somewhere. So that's going to be the avenue I take to kind of grow my wealth and always have a place to live. And but like you say, there's also stock investing, and I'm with you. If there's an advisor that you're talking to, or even a friend that's pushing one thing or another, and you realize that, well, it's because they're going to get a benefit from it, but what's in it for me? Yeah, I think it's time to trade in that advisor.
And one more thing I would say to young people, both my boys are early 20s and they're both working in a W-2 situation and they're both in good situations. They've got full-time jobs and there's other benefits to the job. If you're young, if you can work 10 years in a W-2 situation, it's good, right? Like I know people say, oh, Social Security won't be here, this won't be here, that won't be here. And thing is, like, you don't have to have the whole 2 weeks vacation, matching 401k, FSA, all that, the HSA where they match your pre-tax income and all that. The corporation I was with before, they did have some of those benefits and I did choose to take advantage of it. But like if you're at Home Depot and you're on a W-2, or if you're in a job where they can match your FUI and your SUI for 10 years, it's really good. That's just my opinion. And if you want to use your AI tool and run how many years you'd have to have that with me, I was just extremely glad. I got a job at the state capitol. I worked at a restaurant. I always worked from the time I was like 15. I've worked because my mom's a widow and there were 4 kids. But I've always been glad because now you look back at your contributing income with Social Security and I have a real good story to tell, right? And if
Hmm.
you have one spouse that works and one spouse that doesn't, so if you marry some guy and he's like, oh, honey, baby, you just take off and, you just don't worry about it. Well, he could die or he could go away. And then
Yep.
the other thing is, even if you're making 15,000 a year, which is like, even if you're making 2,000 a month or 1,000 a month, that's still an extra like 12 to 15,000 a year that you could stock away, you could put it into savings, you could use it to enjoy your lifestyle more. To me, I never really pulled myself out of the working world. I took a year off with each kid because I was breastfeeding and I really wanted to do that. And that was my commitment. But like, anyway, to me, it's just nut, you're your nut and you're your security. And if you don't believe that, you need to sit down and have a conversation with yourself.
And yes, I agree wholeheartedly that there, even in 2025, the number of women that I run into that still have this weird mentality that a man is a plan, or that math is hard, so I'm not going to manage my money because I'm going to make a mistake. It it blows my mind that there's still areas of the country where people believe that. And when women can do pretty much anything they want these days, that whole glass ceiling that existed the 60s, 70s, even 80s, um, really doesn't exist anymore. And like you had mentioned earlier, it's go out there, try stuff, figure it out.
And to me, there's no glass ceiling because a lot of these young women aren't going to need to work in corporate America. I mean,
Mhm.
like they can make that opportunity for themselves.
Right. So, what advice would you have for women that are just starting out, especially if in the past they've relied on a partner for their stability?
Um, I mean, I always recommend have a savings account, maybe having a savings account with like, maybe one of your parents or something, where you have a back avenue or you have a back revenue. You can also store cash. I knew a lady that was real interesting. She lived in Austin and she lived on this wild piece of land in Westlake Hills and she restored it and it was a 1-bedroom house and I believe she sold it to Matthew McConaughey, right? I think that was her first big house sale. And she had this beautiful, she bought a painting by this woman that did only pears. Actually, I bought a painting from her too. And she said, "Look, Laura, money attracts money." So she had this envelope, and every time she had cash, she would put money into this cash envelope, right? But she did gardening and she was really an artist. She's a very unusual woman. But I remember her thing about money attracts money, right? So,
Mhm.
and just if and everything that's in your bank account, you don't have to blow it or EFT it. If you're making 2,000 a week, take out $200. The other thing I do, and this sounds kind of weird, but I have my money in about three different banks. I have a credit union and two banks. So like if I'm out of money in my regular account, it's a pain in the butt to have to go to that other bank, which is more old fashioned, which is like a credit union or a small bank and say, "Oh, guess what? I need such and such, got to pay that wire transfer." Just make it so that like, things are kind of separate. And the other thing is, I'm not saying don't get married. I'm just saying the whole world doesn't have to know your business, right? I think women
Mhm.
are raised to think, "Oh, I'm an open book, and if, like if I won the lottery or if I come into money or if I have to do this, don't tell everybody everything about yourself. You just don't have to. It's nobody's business." And there are things that are just private. I don't know. Somehow I grew up thinking that everybody had to know my whole story. And that just wasn't true, right? So
Mhm.
anyway, but I just, it's always a better story to have a little nut tucked away. And if you're contributing to it regularly, and I'm not saying you can't set boundaries or with a partner, or that nobody's supposed to get married and that you don't go into it with love and faith and the best intentions. But I think you'll be a better partner if you're taking care of yourself and not so dependent on that person to do everything for you. And it doesn't matter if you're a woman and your partner's a woman, your partner's a man, love is love, right? This is the way
Right.
that it is. But you will be a better partner if you go into it with the concept that you're going to be able to take care of yourself.
And I love that concept that you, regardless of who the other half of your equation is, that to be a good partner, you need to understand the finances as much as your partner does and not assume that they're going to take care of everything, that you really want it to be a 50-50 partnership. And and if it's not, then learn what you need to take that step and be comfortable with knowing where things are, because there's far too many women living at or below the poverty line at age 65 simply because they always believed somebody else was a plan. It's not up to me. And then they find they're widowed or divorced later in life. They never learned how to deal with money. And they're kind of like, I don't know. What do I do now? And
Yeah.
I really don't want women getting to that point. They need to learn as young as possible.
Sure. And thing is, if you have 10 years of income, if you work in a W-2 job for 10 to 15 years, when you get old, you're going to have Social Security. I
Right.
mean, and then I had a couple of friends that went through divorces, and I'm a divorced woman, I mean, it happens, right? But
Hmm.
but these women said, "Oh, I'm going to get my husband's Social Security." And I was like, "Your ex-husband, you're going to get his Social Security." And they're like, "Oh, yes." So I researched that, and it's only when they die, and it's only if you never remarry. So let's not count on that, right?
Yep.
Anyway, but I mean, again, I don't want to disillusion anybody. I think you and I look back at things and, have seen other relationships or other women, like I knew a woman that just went in, she signed all the divorce papers and she lost the house, she lost everything because she didn't want to look at the divorce papers. She's too afraid. So, like, you know, put on your big girl panties and get your best friend to sit down with you and look at the divorce papers, right? And it was
Yep.
such a great deal because he paid for the divorce, right? I mean, I don't want to say, I don't know. Life is just a long, interesting journey, and you'll do better if you're young and if you have a plan. If you don't have a plan, you're going to end up other than where you wanted to. That's my theory.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just like if you're taking a trip. If you don't have a map, if you don't have a plan, then who knows whether you're going to get to that place you were initially thinking you were going or not. And the same thing with your finances. If you don't create that plan, then any road will get you there, right?
Sure. And I'll tell you what, it's always easier to negotiate a job when you first get a job. I was in recruiting for a long time for a big company everybody's heard of. And, I would hear man after man say, okay, well, I'm making like whatever now, but I want like a 20% increase. And then we give it to them because that's what they asked for right out of the gate, right?
Mm.
So the women would say, well, I'm making this much and I'll make a lateral move. And I would always put like $10,000 extra on that offer, or on that request. So know your value and the other, I mean, I think it's important how I would see men value their salaries at higher amounts than women just out of the gate, right? So
Mhm.
just take that, do that salary survey, try to make yourself, it's a whole lot easier to negotiate the deal just first out of the gate. Like if you're getting married, say, guess what? I'm going to maintain a separate savings account, or me and my dad have a savings account, I'm gonna have a safe, or make sure, because if you start out with, oh honey baby, you're everything and I'm gonna do everything you want to, well, 5 years you've already agreed to that deal. So
Yep.
sit down and figure out what you want, I mean, love is deaf and dumb and it doesn't see very well. Let's put it that way, right? So you just have to take off the guise of like, great intimacy and great love and all that. You just try to sit down and have a business conversation with yourself and just make yourself like 70, right? So
Yep.
that you can realize that, I'm 60, I'm over 60, I feel like I'm 24. I'm not changed. My hair might be a little bit different. I might have a few more wrinkles. I've got some birth child scars and I'm a little chubbier than I used to be. But my core soul and who I am is the same person. So if you see somebody old, just realize, or what you would think of as old, right?
Yep.
Like, my sister's 10 years older than me, and I was 20, and I would see her friends, and I'd be like, oh, they look really good for 29, right? Like it's all perspective. So, and one thing I love that has come down so much, and I'm sure you can relate to this, is, growing up, we all had to look like Barbie and be like a size 4, right? Like there's all different sizes of women, there's all different kinds of hair, there's all different kinds of skin color, there's everything. And everything's beautiful now. And that is one thing with my new product line, Enable, that I love how the beauty industry in general is really agnostic to women over about 45 that can't deal with it. They don't know what to do with them. Brooke Shields wrote a book called Brooke Shields is Not Allowed to Get Old. And the first 2 pages of that book talk about how the beauty industry can just, like batter whipping up a cake. They can whip up sales for people that are, like 13 to like 40. And then over that, they're mystified as to what to do, right? So
Yep.
the beauty industry is now finding its way through products like mine to show accessibility, to show, 18 million Americans are disabled in some way, shape, or form. 20% of Americans are over 50. And and I don't know about you, but I want to look as good as I did at 25. I'll buy the makeup.
Mm.
I'll buy the hair care. I'll buy the stylish clothes. In fact, I'll spend more because I have more money to spend than when I was 25, right?
Exactly.
But I like the idea that it's no matter how you look, you're beautiful, right? And that
Mhm.
also as we age, that we have the right to have products that work for us, that aren't tight and aren't hard to grip, and you don't have to, cry a little bit every time you open a lid or something. So anyway, I don't mean to get off topic with you there, probably did.
No, no, that absolutely that makes perfect sense. Is like you say, the beauty industry is definitely one of those industries where it's it's finally starting to recognize that life doesn't stop at 40.
Yeah. And you can afford that $45 base when you're 40.
Yes. So if there's one message that you could give to women that are listening today about owning their own independence, what would it be?
I think about that. I would say that success is like sunlight, that you can't have enough of it. And I would also say that, I learned this in my church. I grew up in an Episcopal church. And being successful is a gift. It's like you might have a good voice, you might be a great artist, you might be really good at math. Being naturally inclined in business and being a successful person is a gift. And if you're good at being successful, you don't have to be popular, you don't have to be pretty, you don't have to, dance on the drill team or whatever ever the whole world expects from us. But being successful is a gift and it's a talent. And if you have that, why not use it?
So thank you so much for joining us today, and a huge thank you to Laura LeMond for sharing her wisdom and energy with us. If you found value in this conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share the Empowered Money Girl with your friends. The more we spread these stories, the more women we can empower to live boldly, both financially and in every part of life. Until next time, keep thriving. And remember, your journey to empowerment starts with you.